Okay, hello. My name is Victor Gabriel, and today we're going to be talking about the concept of the soul in pre-colonial Philippine culture. Ang konsepto ng kaluluwa, ng duwan, ng makatu sa bago tayo nasakop ng mga Espanyol. Ako nga umuli, si Victor Gabriel Buena, taga BAPS 1-2, at ang aking professor sa Understanding the Self, General Education 08, ay si Miss Eva Hernandez. Okay, let's go. Simulan na natin. Huwag na natin tawag niyan patagalin. Okay, ano bang animism? What is animism? So, ang animism, ito ang mga set ng paniniwala kung saan generally pinapaniwalaan mo ang halos lahat ng mga bagay sa natural na mundo or in the natural world ay may kaakibat or may equivalent na spirit or soul or kaluluwa na makatudungan. Pinapaniwalaan mo na may buhay sila. Animism. Ang animism, ito ay, dito nang gagaling yung salita na Latin na animus, to breathe. Kasi in ancient cultures, binibigyan nilang emphasis ang paghinga. Ang paghinga para sa kanila ay ang nagbibigay ng mga bagay ng kanilang buhay. Katulad ng, makahanap mo to sa mga salitang English, katulad ng inspire. Inspire, ang spire doon ay nagbumula to breathe in. Parang, respiratory system. Naniniwala na sila na ang breathing ay isang essential part ng pagiging tao, ng pagiging buhay. Hindi ng tao actually. Pinapaniwalaan nila na you can expire or you stop breathing. Expiration, di ba? Or perspiration, yung tubig, it's breathing out of you. I mean, ganun yung kanilang culture. So, breathing in ancient cultures, especially in Western and even in Eastern, like Filipino, for example, breathing is very important in their ontological, theological, their philosophical worlds. And the word anima is also where the word animal derives from. Kasi yung mga animals, di ba humihinga sila? Di ba, obviously? And another another word that derives from anima is animated. Animated. Humihinga sila, therefore, gumagalaw sila. That's like a conclusion that you can come up on your own. And another fun, related word to the word anima is anime, yung style of animation na nagmumula at ginagawa sa Japan. And it's a very good and popular so Goku, Naruto, all related to anima or animus or breathing. Si Edward Burnett Tylor, yung anthropologist na pinanganak noong 1832 tapos namatay ng 1917, ang nag-popularize, siya nagpauso ng salitang animism. Yung animism, yung culture na sinabi ko in the very beginning of this TED Talk, ay ang beliefs, again, na ang natural world ay pinapamumunuan ng maraming mga spirits, mga gods, mga deities. There's a god for anything, like the sea, for the oceans, for the rocks, even anything. The forest. History is full of cultures wherein they believed that things were endowed with divine or spiritual supernatural, superstitious beliefs that things had their own spirit. Si Edward Burnett Tylor, in his book Primitive Culture, na pinublish niya noong 1871, ang nagpopularize ng term, ng concept ng animism, na pinapaniwalaan ito yung unang religion ng mga tao. Okay, now that we've established what animism is, animism was the predominant religion amongst the pre-colonial Filipinos in the Philippines. Bago tayo sinakop ng mga Espanyol, yung ating paniniwala ay nakabase sa kung ano-ano yung ating nakikita sa natural na mundo. Pinapaniwalaan na natin sila. Meron silang mga espiritu, meron silang mga makatu, meron silang mga dungan. In other words, in Filipino culture that denote spirits. Kasi, let us not forget that the concept of Filipino is a colonial term. Kasi yung mga islands they're not uniform. Yung entire archipelago, hindi yun lahat sila Filipino. And back then, Filipinos did not think of them as Filipinos. That was a term that was imposed on them by the colonials. They thought of themselves as separate nations. Even barangay to barangay, they didn't think of themselves as the same people. They thought of themselves as completely different nations. Think of it like the Americans don't think of them as Germans, even though they're both white. Therefore, Filipinos back then didn't think of themselves as Filipino. Anyways, now that that's established, let us first, before we go on to describe the cultural beliefs of the Filipinos back then, and especially their concept of soul, let us talk about the differences between the Western conceptions of the soul at ang Filipino concept of kaluluwa, dungan, makatu, etc. Ito, the thinker, si Socrates, and then, naghanap na ako ng image for Filipino derived ancient Filipino art. Okay, yung soul in Western art, kanilang pinapaniwalaan na ito ay immortal. That it exists when you were born and after you are alive, it'll still remain forever. And in contrast to that, yung mga Filipino cultures before the Spanish arrived, yung the soul can cleave out of the body. Ibig sabihin, the body can live without it temporarily. I mean, there are exceptions because, again, let us not generalize too much, but Filipino culture is very diverse indeed. And we will get into that, why I added the caveat temporarily, na yung body, pwede siyang magkaroon ng walang kaluluwa for a time. And then, in Western culture, yung idea, ng konsepto ng soul, ay ginawa siya ng Diyos. That's something that they have in common actually. Ang soul at ang kaluluwa, let's just abbreviate the terms for Western conceptions of soul as just soul itself in English, and in Tagalog, let that be the placeholder for all of Filipino conceptions of soul in Tagalog, in Filipino. That's what soul and kaluluwa have in common. That they are both divine in nature. They are holy, they are sacred. Other things that they have in common is that the soul and the kaluluwa ultimately gives agency. Sila yung nagiging parang nagmamaneho sa kotse na ang katawan. Sila yung nagmamaneho, sila yung espiritu. Sila yung parang captain ng ship sa isang ship. At ang meron din sila isa pa, pangatlo na generally na pagkakatulad, pagkakaparehas. Ang soul at ang kaluluwa, pareho silang kino-conceive ng mga Western people at mga Filipino ancient peoples na separate from the body, meaning yung kanilang kaluluwa at ang kanilang katawan ay hindi iisang bagay kundi dalawa. And another distinction between soul and kaluluwa is that soul is strictly immaterial. Ang ibig sabihin ko doon ay hindi siya nagiging bagay, hindi siya nakikita, invisible siya, and you will see contrasted to this, ang kaluluwa ay minsan, ang dungan ay minsan nagiging physical object, even though metaphysical siya. Hindi siya completely physical, pero parang nagkakaroon siya ng anyo, nagkakaroon siya ng form divorced from the body. You will see, I will talk about this later on. And para sa Westerners, especially the ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Socrates and Plato, para sa kanila, ang soul ay ang principle of life. In the textbook that we were given or we bought from marketing in Cavite State University, yung ibig sabihin ng the principle of life, it says in the textbook that pinagkukunan ng kabuuang tauhan ang soul. And without the soul, a body will die. Pero, in Filipino culture, the dungan, the kaluluwa, the karararuwa, they can go out of the bagi or the body in Ibanag culture. You will see why, or maybe not perhaps why, because this is only just an overview, by the way, of the pre-colonial conceptions of soul in pre-colonial Philippines. Okay. And another thing that separates kaluluwa from the soul is the soul in Filipino culture wanders out of the body when you're full asleep. Isn't that just interesting, right? Okay, let's move on. The soul according to the indigenous peoples of the Philippines. Ito na yung main point ng itong, lahat ng previous na mention ko, all of that is prelude, all of that is preface. This is the main point of the talk, of the video. Yung kaluluwa, yan yung main word na ginagamit natin as equivalent to the English word soul, okay? And usually it's used all over the archipelago, all over the nation of the Philippines. And gimokod, it's mentioned in the textbook, is around here, malapit sa Davao. It's another word for soul, gimokod, in Baydabagobos, which is another subgroup of the tribal group Manobos. Okay, Makatu. Makatu is around Bukidnon. And Makatu, already, the Makatu is conceptualized by the Bukidnon people, by the people who live in Bukidnon and by its tribal folk, na yung soul daw, para sa kanila, yung Makatu, ay nag-i-exist na before the baby is even born. And that, pag pinanganak na nga yung baby, pero before that, pag pregnant pa man yung babae, yung mother, kailangan or nire-ritualize nila, meron silang tradition kung saan naglalagay sila ng decorational cradle around the nursery, kung saan doon daw matutulog yung spirit bago daw siya, yung baby, ipanganak. Yung spirit, doon matutulog. Maliit na cradle na, miniature, okay, na cradle. Which is really like interesting, no? That's pretty fun. And then once after that, yung Makatu, after the baby is born, aalis siya dun sa cradle niya na miniature, at papasok na siya or mag-merge na siya doon sa infant baby. At ang ikaruruwa, ito naman yung konsepto ng soul ng mga taga-Ibanag, which is from Cagayan Valley. Sila yung mga folk people around northern Luzon. Yung bagi, ang kanilang salita for ang katawan, the soul, in Tagalog. And yung bagi ay distinct or separate or hiwalay sa ikararua, which is their word for soul. Pero hindi katulad ng kanluraning konsepto ng kaluluwa, ang soul ay ang ikararua ay pwedeng umalis or pwedeng voluntary, pinipili nito na umalis ng katawan for some reason. At ang phenomenon na to ay tinatawag sa iba na culture ay merkararuanan. Ibig sabihin ng mer na prefix ay to get rid of, and plus kararua meaning the soul. So ibig sabihin, merong caveat ang iba na culture wherein ang kaluluwa or ang kanilang tinatawag na ikararua ay pwedeng maging divorce from the body, ang body, pero pwede pa rin silang mabuhay. Pwede pa rin silang manatiling buhay kahit yung kanilang kaluluwa ay wala sa kanilang katawan or body. And meron silang parang a very interesting and amusing story about that, na bawal mong or binibili na wag mong gisingin sa pamamagitan ng pag-shake o forceful na pagigising ng mga tao, dahil ang kanilang kaluluwa ay baka wala pa sa kanilang katawan at kailangan mo munang tawagin ang kanilang kaluluwa, ang kanilang dungan, ang kanilang ikararua bago para may chance yung dungan o ikararuwa na yon na makabalik sa katawan. Kasi pag nangyari yung ginising mo siya tapos hindi pa nakabalik daw yung ikararuwa niya, magiging parang siyang rudderless boat, parang siyang magiging ship na walang captain. So parang yun yung kanilang explanation siguro for why people are groggy or irritative pag wala silang pagkakagising lang nila tapos ginising mo sila. Ang kadkadua ng mga Ilocano around northern Luzon again ay ang kanilang konsepto ng soul. At ang salitang kadkadua ay may interesting na etymology. Ang dua sa parte ng kadkadua ay yung salitang two, dua, dalawa. Meaning, in the word itself, dinidistinguish nila yung katawan, which is one, and then yung soul, which is two, kadkadua, as separate. And furthermore, ang ibig sabihin ng kadkadua or kadua on its own ay ang pagiging partner or companion. So ang pagdadagdag ng isa pang kadkad para maging kadkad, ay ibig sabihin ito ay pinaka-companion, constant companion or inseparable partner. Let's move on to the main the main buffet, the meal, which is dungan, which is what this chapter or section of the chapter is called in the textbook. Dungan is by the Ilonggo people or the Hiligaynon speaking people, but primarily by the tribal groups living in Panay. Dungan is when the soul is attached to the living. Yun yung salita nila. Dungan, pagbuhay at pag-attach sa loob ng katawan. Or bagi, katulad ng tinatawag ng mga ibanag dito. Pero yung kalag naman, may salita sila for when the spirit is outside of the body. Kalag. Parang kinalas, di ba? Like kalag. Which means na yung kalag ay yung espiritu o ang kaluluwa na nakatakas or dahil namatay or detached siya sa katawan or body ng tao. When a person dies, their soul just leaves their body. And sinasabi daw na pumupunta lang daw siya sa upper regions of somewhere. Upper regions ang sinasabi ng textbook at ng original book na binabasa ng textbook, kung saan yung soul daw ay pumupunta somewhere at naghahanap ng other person or body na ipopossess. Parang exorcist. Isa bang another thing about dungan is that the dungan is normally invisible, except pag natutulog daw ang mga tao, ang kanilang mga dungan ay voluntarily na nagwa-wander outside of their body. Tumatakas. At hindi din sila nagiging invisible, which ang ginagawa nila, nagtra-transform sila, nagsasubsume sila ng isang form kung saan either nagiging, example sa binibigay ng libro, ay nagiging housefly sila, nagiging langaw, or nagiging insekto, kahit siguro ipis, or lizard. Mga lizard. Which means, because of this conception, yung kanilang souls, pag natutulog yung mga taga-Ilonggo, ay vulnerable, susceptible sa aksidente. Pwede silang kainin or pwede silang maapakan or patayin kasi diba insekto sila, ipis sila. Kaya I guess as an animist back then, you would probably be very vegetarian kasi baka kahit anong kainin mo may soul. And yung dungan before, as I mentioned in the Ibanag culture kanina, na kakailangan mong tawagin muna yung kanilang pangalan. Kailangan mo silang i-gentle na nagisingin. Sana gano'n na ako. Sana nakatira na lang ako pala dun sa culture na yan para hindi na ako gigisingin ng kaagad-agad para tatawagin na yung pangalan ko. May time ako para makagising ng hindi naman masyadong groggy, as they say in English. At yung yung lizard, yung lamok, yung langaw, or yung lizard, yung insekto ipis na yun na nagsasubsume bilang yung iyong dungan, ay pwede din siyang, pag naapektuhan yun, pwede kang mamatay or pag hindi siya nakabalik sa iyong katawan, pwede kang maging mawalan ng health. Pwede kang maging very sick pag hindi nakabalik ang dungan na yon, which is whatever it subsumes when it wanders out of the body. And that is all for this talk. Thank you very much for listening to me rant about the conceptions of the soul, or makatu, ikararua, kaluluwa, etc. in pre-colonial Philippines. Ito yung aking mga reference, kinuha ko mula sa Britannica, Encyclopedia, and from the Pennsylvania Museum, and even Cora, and also from the book. which this is the main references of that chapter in that book, the soul. Thank you very much.